Hi, magical friends. Just a quick little message from me. There is so much going on in the world right now, and I'm particularly mindful of what's been happening in Palestine. And so, before we jump into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that over the last several months, I've been raising funds for various nonprofits that are helping the residents of Gaza and sadly now Rafah. And my latest round of fundraising is once again for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. So please do check that out over on my personal Instagram page, which is at Phantasmaphile. And that's spelled with PHs, or you can just look up my name. And please donate if you are able to. And thank you so much to those who have given already. And if you're interested in learning more about the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, you can check out their phenomenal and essential work over at pcrf.net. Thank you so much. This season of The Witch Wave is brought to you in part by Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab. Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab is a fragrance house specializing in body and household blends with a dark, romantic, gothic tone. Over the years, they've collaborated with some of my very favorite creative visionaries, including Neil Gaiman, Jim Jarmusch, the Jim Henson Company, and most recently, Junji Ito. They continually return to inspirations drawn from witchcraft, paganism, and mythology, and they also have a sister store called Twilight Alchemy Lab, which creates oils blended and consecrated specifically for ritual use. The lab recently released their annual Halloween perfume collection, a limited edition series which includes scents inspired by folklore accounts of lycanthropy. Customer reviews of their products can be found at the fan-run bpal.org web forum, and you can check out all of their perfumes and other enchanting concoctions over at blackphoenixalchemylab.com. Hi, Witch Wavers. I have exciting news. At long last, we have some new Witch Wave merch available for you now through TeePublic. We decided to go with TeePublic for our new Witch Wave merch because it is a print-on-demand site, which means you can get different variations of the Witch Wave logo printed on t-shirts, mugs, totes, stickers, magnets, notebooks. Oh my gods, the sky's the limit. And the shirts come in different styles and fabrics and colors and are available in sizes small through 5XL, so you can order whatever you'll feel you're most magical in. So head on over to witchwavepodcast.com/shop.
The world is filled with bewitching people, and you might be one too. Welcome to the podcast where art is magic is real, and reality is stranger than dreams. I'm Pam Grossman, and this is The Witch Wave.
Hello, and welcome to The Witch Wave. As I record this, it is an absolutely splendid spring day here in Brooklyn, and I'm coming off of a weekend that was packed with art and magic, my favorite. Matt and I had to take a quick trip to Houston for personal reasons, but while we were there, we found time to go back to the Rothko Chapel and the Manil Collection, which has one of the finest permanent exhibitions on surrealism in America. And being in these two temples of art was such a balm for the soul. And then on Sunday night, we went to the art opening for a new show of work by my dear friend and prior Witchwave guest, Jessie Bransford, and Elizabeth Insonia. And their dual show is called Pale Hecate's Team. And it is just bursting with beauty and witchcraft, and I highly recommend you check it out. It's up now at Tappeto Volente Gallery in Gowanus, Brooklyn through July 14th, and there's just nothing that compares to seeing it in person. You can see some of the images online, but please go in person if you are able to. You are going to love it. These are two occult artists at the height of their powers. And Jessie and Liz have different aesthetics and sensibilities, but because they're both rooted in deep magical practice, the dialogue between the two of them is just delicious. So definitely check it out if you're able to. And speaking of art and magic, just a reminder that Jonica Stuckey and I are teaching an online workshop on Thursday, June 13th. That's the day after this episode drops. And that workshop is on the theme of the divine triad. So there will be lots of gorgeous images and discussion about triple goddesses and triform gods and other examples of magical trios, as well as some ritual and meditation and other good stuff. So you can go ahead and sign up for that at pamgrossman.com/events or via the link in my Instagram bio at Phantasmophile. And yes, it will be recorded, and cost is sliding scale as it usually is, so please do join us. We would love to have you. Now, the relationship between art and magic is a topic that is so close to my heart. If I have any kind of thesis statement or organizing principle for my life and my work, it's that art and magic are deeply related to each other, if not one and the same. And so celebrating examples of this throughout my different projects, especially now in this new book that I'm writing, is just one of the great missions and joys of my life. And tarot is one of the most potent examples of this, because these cards are divinatory tools, yes, but they are also beautiful works of art. And so I always love when tarot shows up in fine art, in literature, in cinema, in music, and so on. The Bob Dylan songs Changing of the Guards and No Time to Think are full of tarot references. And I love the album Major Arcana by Derek Schmidt, in which every track is about a different tarot card in, yes, the Major Arcana. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Witchwave guests Spelling and Sadie Dupuis of Speedy Ortiz, both of whom have albums named after tarot concepts. And then there's tarot-rific fiction like Italo Calvino's The Castle of Crossed Destinies of 1973 and Rachel Pollack's The Tarot of Perfection of 2008, both which contain stories either derived by tarot or incorporating tarot imagery and themes. And, of course, a lot of people cite T.S. Eliot's epic 1922 poem, The Waste Land, as one of the more famous examples of tarot in literature. And I love how in this poem, Eliot not only alludes to cards like the Hanged Man and the Wheel, which, of course, is the Wheel of Fortune, but he also makes up his own cards, such as the Phoenician Sailor and Belladonna, Lady of the Rocks. I also recently played a video game on Nintendo Switch called The Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, wherein you play this little witch who is captive in a sort of floating space cottage, and you have to invent your own tarot cards and do readings with them in order to advance in the game. And it is so addictive and so charming, and I finished it in one weekend. I just loved building the cards and seeing what fantastical names and meanings the game came up with for the cards I created. There were cards with names like the Rainmaker and Fragrant Meditation and the Lustful Mermaid. So fucking fun. You should definitely play it if you have a Switch and a couple hours to spare. But all of this wouldn't exist without the centuries of tarot creators and illustrators throughout history, many of whom were women. And today I have the very good fortune of getting to speak with the illustrator and writer Kat Willett, who has 2 gorgeous tarot-themed books out. One is called Queen of Wands, and it's a graphic novel about the iconic tarot artist Pamela Colman Smith. The other is an illustrated book called The Women of Tarot, and I just love my conversation with Kat about these books and about her work because we delve into the lives of these magical and visionary ladies, and we talk all about illustration as an act of illumination, especially when it comes to shedding light on the divinely feminine history of tarot. This conversation was such a pleasure, and I learned so much from Kat both during our talk and from her mystical, artful books. But before we get to that, first let's check and see what's come through on the Witch Wire.
Who is it?
Witches.
Amanda writes, "Hello, Pam. Thank you so much for your wonderful podcast, and I love, love, love your book, Waking the Witch. It's so full of information and confirmation of what I've already read and learned about. Your thoughts match mine so well. I do have some concerns, though, about being a new witch. I am a young mom to a 3-year-old, and we are signing him up to a Christian preschool. My fear is that by sending him there, he will grow to learn that his mom is a witch and that he may want to kill me as he gets older. I had a nightmare about that happening as well, probably because of my current fears and nervousness. I identify as a witch for so many reasons. Not just rebellion, but mostly because it just makes sense. I feel it in my bones somehow, and I can hear the trees talking, and I can feel their pain with the current world troubles with nature. Thank you for reading." Hi, Amanda. Many, many thanks for your lovely words about my work. I love, love, love reading them, and I'm so happy that Waking the Witch has been so affirming for you. And as a matter of fact, that book just turned 5 last week. I can't believe it. And it makes me so happy knowing that it's still circulating out in the world and waking more witches. And may it continue to do so for many years to come. So in regard to your question, I always like to remind people that witches can be of any religion or of no religion at all. As I've said many times now, I'm technically Jewish. I didn't renounce my Jewish heritage when I claimed my witchery and paganness, and I get to define my own spiritual identity however I wish, and I can continue to shift and evolve moving forward as we all can. And so being a witch does not mean that you have to reject other religions if you don't want to. And since this is a tarot episode, I'm reminded that Pamela Colman Smith, about whom we'll be talking a lot today, she was very magical. She was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn when she designed her tarot deck with A.E. Waite. But she later in life converted to Catholicism. And remember that a lot of the imagery that she used in her tarot deck was coming from a Christian mystical point of view, which is one of the reasons why you see all kinds of Judeo-Christian images of angels and, like the high priestess is holding the Torah. And there's all kinds of other references in her cards. And she, of course, was also riffing on much earlier decks, which also incorporated this mystical Judeo-Christian Kabbalah-ish symbolism that a lot of Western Europeans had been combining and experimenting with for centuries. And so my point here is that there are lots of blurry lines and cross-pollinations and appropriations that have happened throughout magical history, for better and for worse. But the bright side of that is you don't have to pick a club, as it were. And you and your son are empowered to develop your magic in a way that honors various traditions, as long as you're doing it respectfully and crediting the people who originated a lot of these practices. Now, in terms of your own fear, my goodness, that dream sounds incredibly anxiety-provoking. I'm so sorry that it happened. And look, I don't know the school you're sending your son to. I think if it's a place that teaches him to harm people who are not Christian or who are otherwise different than him, then you probably will want to consider finding a different school for him, because I can't imagine that you'd want him internalizing any messages of bigotry or violence, right? But hopefully this school will be promoting Christian ideals such as love and service and charity. And I think that one of your jobs as a parent is to tell him that while he may be learning about Christian stories and traditions in school, that's not the only valid perspective. And that he's going to meet a lot of people of different backgrounds and lived experiences and beliefs than Christianity. And that accepting and tolerating, and I would say loving people who are not Christian also, which is a lot of the world, is essential. Now, when he gets older, I think that's a time you can explain more of your witchcraft practice to him if you wish. But he's just too little to understand what Christianity is right now, let alone what witchcraft is or what paganism is. He's so little that I doubt any of the preschool lessons are going to even be about witches. So I don't think you really have to worry yet. I don't think you have to address this for a little while. But in the meantime, of course, you can teach him about how much you love the earth and nature, how you celebrate the seasons and the trees and the flowers, how you do rituals that make you feel connected to creativity and strength and love and compassion. And as long as you model those things for him for the time being, I don't think you have to do too much other explaining. Now, when he gets older, you can share with him how you identify and why if you choose to. And hopefully by then, you will have also gotten a sense of if his school is an inclusive, accepting, friendly place or not. And then you can decide if it's a place he should continue attending or not. But I think your dream was a nightmare, not a prophecy. It's a dream about your fear. But in reality, you have the power to raise your son with love and openness and to choose which teachers he is exposed to as he gets older. If any teacher is giving lessons on hurting or oppressing anyone who's different, witch or not, then they are probably not the right teacher for your child. But let's assume that this preschool is going to teach him some basic kindness and lessons about caring, and hopefully like the alphabet and colors and shapes. So my advice is to not worry too much for the time being, and you can reassess this as he gets older and make changes and recalibrate if you need to in order to ensure that he's getting messages of love and acceptance at every stage of his growth. I hope that's helpful, and I wish you and your son the very best. Now, on to my guest. Kat Willett is a Brooklyn-based artist. She has written, illustrated, and published 2 full-length books. The first is her graphic novel, The Queen of Wands, the story of Pamela Colman Smith, the artist behind the Rider-Waite tarot deck. Her newest book, Women of Tarot, An Illustrated History of Divinators, Card Readers, and Mystics, is out this week. Kat is fascinated by tarot as a facet of art history, and her work aims to elevate the women behind its evolution. She's dedicated the last few years to telling these magical stories in her published books, both of which feature her own research and gorgeous artwork. Kat also makes illustrated comics about parenting, motherhood, gender, and animals, and she is a regular contributor to the Washington Post. Other clients and publications include the New York Times, Apple, Doc Martens, the Museum of Arts and Design, and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, to name a few. And she is also available for select freelance work and other projects as well. Kat joined me from her home in Brooklyn via Zoom. Kat Willett, welcome to the Witch Wave.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam. I'm such a huge fan of the show. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And I'm such a huge fan of your work. So it's a mutual admiration society. So, Kat, I know you have a brand new book out, Women of Tarot. I can't wait to talk about that. But I actually want to start this conversation with your prior book, just to set the stage a little bit. This is your graphic novel. It's called The Queen of Wands, the story of Pamela Colman Smith, the artist behind the Rider-Waite tarot deck. And I'm a huge Pamela fan. As you can imagine, we share a name. She was born 2 days after me, though several years before me. Yeah, I'm a Valentine girl, and she's February 16th. So I just feel such a kinship with Pixie. And I love that you wrote an entire and illustrated an entire graphic novel about her. So what made you decide for that to be your first, I would call that a big project for you, unless there's something I've missed that you've done that's long before that one?
No, you're absolutely correct. That was my first big project. And first, real quick, I'll say I feel like Pamela is such a great name. There's so many great Pamelas throughout history. So that's amazing that you guys share that name and almost a birthday. Super cool that she's so amazing.
The best.
Such an icon. She is in the present because I feel like she's still with us and her work is living through us in so many ways. Queen of Wands was my first long form project. I discovered her when I first moved to New York back in my earlier 20s, and I had a tarot reading, my first tarot reading at Catland Books.
Oh, R.I.P. Catland.
I know. And it was so transformative. I mean, I'd always been kind of interested in tarot. I'd been a bit into astrology, but I had never had a reading before. I'm from a smaller town, so it just wasn't a thing that people did. And yeah, I went and had this reading. It was incredible. And I'm so grateful because the reader, his name was Damon, when he showed me the Rider-Waite Smith deck, he said, "This is the Rider-Waite deck, but I call it the Smith deck after the artist who did all of the artwork." And I was like, oh, that's cool. Pamela Colman Smith. Then I went on to go to grad school. And I had to come up for illustration, and I had to come up with a thesis paper concept. And I knew I wanted to do something about women artists and art history and obscurity. And I was interested in spiritualism and the occult. And I kind of remembered that conversation that I had with this reader and this artist that he mentioned. And I looked her up and I couldn't find much about her at the time. That was maybe 2016.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. I was wondering when, because to your point, it seems as though a lot of people didn't even know who she was, even within the last 10 or so years, unless you were like a deep tarot head. And suddenly there's all this research and scholarship about her, but it was really like a desert of information about her until very recently.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In a preliminary Google search, I found like one little Wikipedia page about her. As you mentioned, there were tarot historians that already knew about her and are much more well-versed in her life story than I am. But I had to kind of dig to find that because she was absolutely not a household name, and she still isn't. But her story has increased in popularity over the last decade, and that's amazing. I'm really grateful for that because she was incredible. And I think like that, the fact that there wasn't so much information about her is what inspired me to kind of look into her story and write about her. I was looking at it from kind of an art historical perspective. Like there's this deck of cards that this woman illustrated. Nobody really knows who she is at this point, unless you're very, very into this theme of artwork or into tarot.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it's like the most widely distributed work of art of all time. Like there are millions of decks sold, you know?
The images are iconic. I mean, people who don't even know what the images are from see them on t-shirts and mugs. And I mean, it's absolutely everywhere.
Exactly.
And so many of the modern decks now, whether intentionally or not, are riffing off of her artworks. Now, let's be clear, Kat, and you do a beautiful job of this in both of your books. Pamela is just one person coming from a very long, long lineage of tarot illustrators, tarot deck creators. But her images are the ones that became the most popular when they came out
Hmm.
in 1909, although probably they weren't popular for several decades after once mass reproduction started, right?
Exactly. The reason why her cards became kind of the gold standard for decks that are made today is because she was kind of the first artist to draw a full narrative scene for each of the 78 cards, so the major and the minor. She
Mm-hmm.
was the first to do that since the Filabusca deck in the 1400s. Her style is so accessible. You know, you can look at an image in the deck and understand what's going on very, very easily. You can generate your own story from it. And that's what she believed, is that she wanted anyone to be able to interpret the cards in a way that was relevant to them. And I know that some tarot naysayers are like, well, then what's the point if anyone can see anything? And to me, that's the whole entire point, is that
Mm-hmm.
these tarot cards are tools for self reflection. And so if we have more universal, accessible images, anyone who looks at them can find some kind of guidance, a story that they can attribute to their life or what they're going through at the time. But yeah, she, of course, was not the only one. There were many other people before her and after her making decks and interpreting tarot in their own way. But she was kind of the first to create a scene for every single card in the deck, which is also why it's such an incredible artistic feat. I mean, as an illustrator, I cannot imagine doing that. She did them all in under 6 months.
It's insane. Insane.
It's almost like something was speaking through her, you know, like she just nailed it. And you mentioned also, you're correct that the cards were not popular when they came out. They were still a bit obscure, but it was the first deck that was sold kind of, you know, to the public market
Mm-hmm.
at trade shows and craft fairs and things like that. But from what I recall, the cards were like kind of printed a bit shoddily and the backs peeled away. And so it was recalled and then it wasn't reprinted until several decades later after she had already passed.
Oh,
She
wow.
never saw the success of her deck in her lifetime, unfortunately.
And let's also underscore this. It's come up before on the podcast, and I wrote a little bit about it in Waking the Witch. When A.E. Waite partnered with her on this or commissioned her to do this, A.E. Waite, member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, just as she was, a
Hmm.
cult scholar, writer. It was kind of his idea, right, to have a new deck that he wanted to work with an artist on.
Hmm.
But he paid her like fucking nothing
Yeah,
and she didn't see any royalties. So this iconic deck that, we today still think of as like one of the most incredible works of occult artwork, certainly, if not artwork. She like died pretty impoverished and she did lots of other illustration gigs and stuff, but she did not see much money from this deck, nor was she credited. Her name was not on the deck. It was the Rider Waite deck, right?
absolutely.
I love this idea of you wanting to make sure that she gets her flowers. And I imagine as an illustrator, that is kind of maybe like a reclamation or a course correction, because I would think that would be a nightmare scenario for someone like yourself to, not get credited for your work, to not get paid for your work, for no one to know it was you the whole time. So
Hmm.
can you talk through your personal connection to her? Because I love the autobiographical piece that's in the graphic novel as well.
You hit the nail on the head on all accounts. I mean, I have so many feelings about her and her life that connect to mine. And I think even writing about her was so kind of therapeutic because I had a fine art background, fine art and art history. And then after moving to New York, I decided to pursue illustration, which has traditionally been seen as commercial art. And the real difference between fine art, quote unquote, and illustration or commercial art is that with commercial art, you get paid per project, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't make work then with the hope that someone may buy it or that a gallery may show it. And I think because of that, it's been left out of the canon of art history through the ages a bit. And I think for me, going back to grad school and getting my MFA in illustration and pursuing that was a bit of a way for me to kind of say F you to that idea that illustration isn't fine art or is not as important. Because when I look back, it was the illustrations and the books that I was reading that made me want to be an artist in the first place.
Yes.
To see that there's absolutely no difference, in storytelling through a painting that's being shown on the wall versus illustrations in a book. So that was like a big step for me. It's not that anybody told me that illustration wasn't valuable in my life, but it was more that I didn't have role models that were commercial artists or illustrators. I come from a very artistic background, but a lot of people had day jobs in other arenas and then
Mm-hmm.
pursued their art kind of in the background. And this was my way of being like, okay, I'm going to pursue this full time and I'm going to be all in, jump in feet first.
Yes.
So that was like really cool to then, learn about her life story and see how she challenged the norm in so many ways outside of just being a woman illustrator in 1909, which was already difficult enough. And then on top of that, she lived in Brooklyn for a stint. She went to Pratt. I live right near Pratt.
Mm-hmm.
I walk through that campus all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of explored lots of different spiritual practices and then kind of fell into tarot. And I really related to that. And yeah, I mean, I think that most artists have experienced, unfortunately, what it's like to not be credited or paid appropriately for your work. And I wanted to kind of, I don't know, it was like my small attempt at healing the past a little bit to kind of try to do her justice and give
Yes.
her, the accolades that she deserves and really see her as this figure of art history that she is. And a couple of years ago, the Whitney had a massive show on modernism and they included some of her paintings
Yes.
and her
Yes.
deck drawings. And that was like such an amazing moment for me because she's getting her due as an artist, as an
Exactly.
important artist in the canon of art history.
That's right. Now, I know that incredible tome came out a few years ago, which I know was a big reference point for you too. It was a book
Mhm.
called Pamela Colman Smith, The Untold Story. Stuart Kaplan edited it and he started US Games Company, US Games Corp. I forget what the
Ink.
Inc.
Yeah.
Limited, something
One
like
of
that.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know he passed away recently, but I just feel like we should bring his name into the chat as someone who deserves a lot of credit for helping to elevate her profile. And that book, along with the scholarship of several other writers who contributed to that book, was a game changer. However, I have to say that reading your book and seeing your illustrations, spiritually speaking, just like brought this whole other level of like nourishment and meaning and magic because I think honoring Pixie through the medium of illustration is so apt. So I find the whole book so moving. It's such a wonderful primer and celebration of her life. And I just wanted to give you a big brava for it.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so meaningful to me.
So, one thing I did want to ask you about, and I really appreciated the decision you made, but I imagine it had to be something you thought about, which is how to depict her. Because a
Mm.
lot of people say perhaps she was biracial. A lot of people say perhaps she was queer. And those communities have certainly claimed her, which I think is beautiful. But there's so much we don't know. We don't necessarily have quote unquote evidence to prove these things. And I know in Stuart Kaplan's book, they kind of waffle about it. You depict her as being biracial. You talk about it pretty openly in your text. You also basically say, like, yeah, maybe we don't know that she was queer, but like, come on. She lived with a woman. She was friends with all these suffragette lesbians and bohemians. So, what made you feel bold enough to kind of decide to depict her in that manner?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, that was a challenge, and I'm still not sure if I did it right. And I still look back and I wonder about it. But I do think that people have shown themselves to us throughout history, and we've refused to see them for who they are over and over and over. And I didn't want to be part of that. I didn't want to waffle around. I think that the tome you're talking about, Stuart Kaplan and Mary Kay Greer's book, was a fantastic reference point for me. And they deserve so much credit for publishing the actual ephemera from her life that gives us this insight into who she was. The reason why it's so compelling to read and write about Pamela is that we have like things like letters and the guest book from her house and poems that she wrote that serve as kind of primary sources and give us a glimpse into her feelings and who she hung out with. And I kind of think that the writing is on the wall, and I realized they published an academic text. They can't say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's all facts.
Right.
We don't have her mother's birth certificate, so we cannot say 100% that she was biracial. However, we have written statements of the way that people described her, and not a very nice way. People that she was close to, the way that they described her appearance, which is very much in line with the prejudices of the time and the oppression and microaggression and violence that people of color faced
Mm-hmm.
at the time that she was living and working. And yeah, I mean, the people that she chose to affiliate with, known feminists, known lesbians, suffragettes, women who would do things like smoke cigarettes when it was like,
Ah,
gasp, or wear pants,
yes, scandal, scandal.
scandalous. And she does things unabashedly. So I think I try to say, hey, I don't know for sure. I don't know this woman personally. I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we would be doing her a disservice by not acknowledging those challenges that she faced. Because if she was biracial, that added a massive obstacle onto her path of already, being a woman artist without marrying a man was already difficult enough. If she were biracial or even appeared to be anything other than white, then she faced a whole slew of repression that I
Mm-hmm.
think is important to talk about and pay attention to. And then on top of that, if she was also queer and living with a woman, you can imagine it wasn't an easy life. And she did end up kind of going into isolation toward the end of her life. She lived with Nora Lake, who I believe to be her partner. Pamela was Nora's caretaker. Nora suffered from PTSD from World War I, and they lived together and they lived a very quiet life. And I don't have any doubts that that's because of some of the treatment that she faced earlier in her life, and she wanted to escape. So, yeah, that's kind of my reasoning, but I invite other people, artists, writers, to look into her life as well and give us their interpretation,
Yeah.
especially artists of color and queer artists and people who may be able to speak to that a little bit more accurately than I can. I see this book as a jumping point,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful answer. And I really appreciated your approach. And I thought you depicted her beautifully. And just to be clear, you do say in the text, you're not sure. You say that right in the book. But I appreciate that you trusted your intuition on it and decided to make an artistic, and I would say a spiritual choice as well. And I do believe that when we kind of resurrect people who came before us, it's an act of spiritual stewardship. You're honoring her legacy, you're sharing her work, you're sharing her story. And I believe that her spirit probably is guiding some of those choices. Now, I may or may not be right, but it's something I like to think
Mm,
about a lot when it comes to, a lot of these women who didn't get their due when they were alive, who now, people like a Hilma af Klint or an Agnes Pelton, all of these amazing visionary artists that I see Pamela as being part of the lineage of, who now we're celebrating and we're giving them their due. I just think the book is so, so beautiful, and I so appreciate the work you did on it.
thank you so much.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. This season of The Witch Wave is brought to you in part by Sphere and Sundry, an astro-magical atelier where you can get expertly elected materia magica, oils, incense, bath salts, salves, inks, beauty oils, and more, which have been ritually crafted during rare, powerful, and benefic astrological configurations. And oh my word, I can tell you firsthand, this is the stuff. These formulas are chosen in accord with the strict requirements of the talismanic tradition outlined in the Picatrix and other ancient grimoires, meaning you can benefit from the power of amazing astrological transits even when the stars haven't aligned. These are incredible tools for witches who are looking to embrace the manifestations and results of their spell work, especially the Luna in Cancer series. And I myself have the Luna in Cancer incense, and it is a dream to use for any kind of lunar magic. Venus materia can be used for love, glamour, and attraction. Regulus for fame and recognition, Asclepius for healing and transformation, and Deneb al-Gedi for protection. I also used several of Spear and Sundry's magical products on site in Greece during our group rituals, and they were so potent and so exquisite. I can't say enough good things about them. Since 2018, Spear and Sundry have been a key driver in the rising tide of popularity and interest in astrological magic, amassing over 5,000 five-star reviews and field reports on their website. Most orders ship within 1 business day, and Spear and Sundry is also well known for their incredible customer service, as they are their magical results, and I can attest to that as well. Learn more and get $10 off your first order at spearandsundry.com using the code WitchWave. That's spearandsundry.com, SPHEREANDSUNDRY.com, and use code WitchWave for $10 off your first order.
The Witch Wave is sponsored by BetterHelp. I cannot believe that we're already halfway through this year. It has gone by so quickly, but it's a really good time to stop and take stock of where we're at. Lately, I've been thinking about stuff that I'm proud that I've done in 2024. And also, I've been thinking about things that I still want to accomplish in the second half of this year. I'm really proud of all the writing I've been doing, and I'm so happy that I'm currently on track to finish my new book and hit the deadline that I've been given. Let me knock on wood. But it also means that I haven't been as on top of some of my self-care goals. I totally admit it. And so now is a really good time for me to, yes, celebrate my wins, but also recalibrate a bit and make adjustments for the rest of the year. Therapy can help each of us take stock of our progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. And as you all know, I'm a huge, huge proponent of therapy, and I cannot say enough good things about how going to various therapists at various points throughout my life has helped me internalize my successes, as well as come up with strategies to make future changes that I need to make to keep myself feeling well. Therapy provides us with an opportunity to pause and take a moment to consider not only where we've come from or where we're at, but also where we want to go from here and how we can get there. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take a moment with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/witchwave today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, spelled HELP.com/witchwave.
Would you like even more Witchwave? Do you wish that you could hear from me and my other magical guests on a weekly basis? And what about doing monthly rituals with yours truly? Then come join me over on Patreon, where you'll get bi-weekly bonus Witch Wave Plus episodes, ad-free Witch Wave episodes, and detailed show notes for all. I also lead a monthly online magical workshop, which you can attend live or watch the recording of at your convenience. Rewards for some tiers also include magical merch and contests where you can win Witchly prizes each month, as well as early heads up about my other workshops before they sell out. And you can even sign up for the opportunity to work with me one-on-one. And all backers get access to our exclusive digital coven where you can connect to a community of other wonderful Witch Wave witches around the world. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to patreon.com/witchwave now and sign up. It's a magnificent way to get more magic in your life and to support the show. Thanks so much.
Welcome back to the Witch Wave. Today I'm speaking with Kat Willett. So, Kat, you have a brand new book out. It's a little bit different in that it's not a graphic novel, it's an illustrated book. Very illustrated, but it's a lot of text as well. And this is called Women of Tarot, an illustrated story of divinators, card readers, and mystics. And why don't you tell our listeners what this book is about and why you decided this would be your next project?
Yeah, well, I think that this goes along the lines of like not trying to force projects and letting them come to you. Because when I was researching Pamela Colman Smith and writing my book about her, I kept on coming across other occult women and artists who had created decks and people who did various things to contribute to the overall evolution of the history of tarot. And I would make notes about them as I would go along the way. And then eventually I had enough content for a whole book. So I think it kind of just appeared in my research over a long period of time, of course. And then I did some digging to try to find other people to kind of intersperse throughout the history, I should say. I wanted to write a kind of comprehensive history of tarot that would be accessible to people that you could potentially read in a couple of evenings that highlighted four key women that really, made tarot what it is today. That would be Pamela Colman Smith, Marie Anne Lenormand, Lady Frieda Harris, and Rachel Pollack.
Yes.
And I can go into the work of those people if you'd like. And then kind of interspersing the stories of other mystics, artists, and occultists who didn't necessarily use tarot, but their work helped pave the way for it to become, what it is that we understand today. So I go through the book chronologically through time. And then when we get to the end of the US Civil War, for example, and with like World War I right around the corner, I talk about how communing with the dead and thinking about the afterlife was very much on people's minds with so much mass destruction and violence and death in the world. And while at that time, like Europeans and Americans were tapping into tarot and magic for answers, there were other people in other parts of the world doing their own things spiritually. For example, Teresa Urrea, who was a spirit guide and a healer working in Mexico at the time. And then I kind of explore how her work was different and similar to someone like Pamela Colman Smith, for example, and the way that they were kind of similar is how they both sort of helped to open up pathways for spiritual guidance and healing outside of that conventional organized religion of the time in their respective communities. It's the history of tarot. The four main women are directly linked to tarot, and then there are other occult spiritual leaders. Some you will recognize right away, some are a little bit less known, but all together they kind of tell that story of spiritual rebellion and unconvention throughout the ages.
Yeah. And just to give listeners some context, I mean, you start with Nefertiti. Like, we're going way back. And you bring up people like Marie Laveau and Zora Neale Hurston, in addition to some contemporary folks, such as the late Rachel Pollack, whom listeners of the podcast will be familiar with because I got to interview her on this show, one of my favorite interviews of all time. and Nansei Kawashima, who's also been on the show, who's a contemporary tarot reader and an amazing artist. So you really do this broad spectrum of mystical women, many of whom are tarot illustrators, tarot practitioners, but then to your point, some of whom are kind of like tarot adjacent, but help give us a fuller context about feminism and magic and spirituality that has always been interlinked as far as I'm concerned. You know, there's always been this connection between feminism and feminine energy. And I'm using these words very broadly and inclusively, but the fact of the matter is, like, it's often women and femmes who are doing intuitive practices, magical services, who are perceived to have certain gifts. And so I think you do a really lovely job of giving us a nice overview of all of that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so much I want to respond to. First of all, I loved your interview with Rachel Pollack. That was something that I used as a resource in my book. And I've recently connected with her partner, Zoe Madoff, and given her the book. And it was important to me that I got her blessing because I was hoping to interview Rachel in person. But unfortunately, she became ill and passed. And it was such a great loss to our community. So I feel really grateful that I could include her in this book. And yeah, Nanze, I met her at the gym like years ago when I was writing my thesis about Pamela. And I found out that she was a tarot reader, and I interviewed her for my grad school thesis, which is like so crazy.
That's so crazy.
And then you've had her on, and she's done several readings for me. And for the launch of Women of Tarot on June 18th, which is coming up, she will be at the event doing mini readings in person.
Oh, fabulous.
So for anyone who's in Brooklyn, she's in the book. I wrote about her story, and then she'll be there in person giving 10-minute readings. So very excited about that.
That makes me so happy. I love it. What a tangled tarot web we weave.
Yes, yeah, for sure. We're all connected. And yeah, to your point about including these people who are tarot adjacent, like I also think it's important to recognize that tarot for a very long time was reserved for like the upper class and men specifically, like women of color, women in certain parts of the world, women of a certain class weren't allowed access to it. And so to leave out women who didn't directly have tarot in their lives at the time would be such a disservice to them because they may have not have been allowed to utilize tarot. But they were still doing things at the time that helped people to open up spiritual channels in their lives and to guide. And of course, there are so many spiritual guides in the world who are men. I don't want to leave them out, but I think there is something about that female intuition. I was just listening to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast this morning.
I love
It's
that
one of my
podcast.
favorite.
Me too. Me too. It's so good.
And she was interviewing Gloria Steinem, and she said at the beginning, you know, just talking about this divine feminine intuition is real and it's been around forever. And it's not a coincidence that most of these people who have pushed mysticism and tarot specifically forward are women and women identifying folks.
So I'm so happy you bring this up because I can share a factoid of mine that is one of my favorite factoids about Gloria Steinem that I have seen almost no one write about or mention, including her. She does it very rarely. Both of her grandmothers were theosophists.
Oh, crazy.
And no one fucking talks about it. And like, I keep trying to figure out how I can mention that in one of my books. And I don't know if it's a factoid for the book I'm working on or if it's just something that listeners need to know about. She doesn't like hide it. It's in interviews that she's mentioned in passing before, but she definitely doesn't like emphasize it. And I find that to be an incredible link. She had these two grandmothers who were members of this women-run spiritual organization that was highly problematic, let's be honest, but also very pioneering in terms of what it did for a lot of different, certainly spiritual movements, but also art movements and cultural movements. And so, yeah, anyway, sorry, that's my little Gloria Steinem tangent.
No, that's awesome. Wasn't her grandmother a suffragist as well?
That's right. And as we know, a lot of the suffragists and the spiritualists and the abolitionists A lot of them held both of those or all of those identities. So it's very, very interesting. There's a wonderful book by Anne Browdy called Radical Spirits that's all about the rise of feminism and the rise of the spiritualist movement and how they're kind of interlinked. So at the root of a lot of these mystical women's movements is also spiritualism or alternative spiritualities. And I just find it so exciting.
Oh, that is so interesting. I just wrote the name of that book down. I'm going to read it. And
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I talk about it in the book a little bit that whenever there are like times of unrest or confusion or violence in the world, people turn to things outside of the church. They turn to things like astrology, tarot,
Witchcraft.
witchcraft,
Hmm.
mysticism for answers. And so it would make total sense that political unrest and spiritual progress would go hand in hand.
Evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that point comes through in your book, Women of Tarot, very clearly. I want to, it's funny. I'm kind of like, I wish I had a card I could pull to help me make this decision. I'm like, on the one hand, I kind of want to ask you about two women specifically. And on the other hand, I want people to read the book and not give too much away. I'm
Mm,
going to trust my first intuition though and bring up two names. I think you mentioned them or I mentioned them already. One is Mary Anne Lenormand,
mhm,
and the other is Lady Frieda Harris. Can you
mhm.
just give us little bite size summaries of these women? Because they're both so important to the history of tarot, and neither of them is as much of a household name as I think they should be.
Yeah, great call. And there are plenty of other women to read about in the book, so I don't think that this is too much of a spoiler.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I'll start with Marianne Lenormand because she came earlier chronologically. She was born in the late 1700s in France. She was orphaned at a young age and raised by step parents, essentially. But she was a bit of a difficult child, very rebellious, very, mischievous. So they sent her to a convent to live with Benedictine nuns. So, ultimate punishment of the time, right? We send you to the nuns. And there she started to show signs of clairvoyance. She was young, I believe under 10, and I think around 7. And she would start to make predictions about her classmates and the nuns, and they started to come true. So
Mm.
she was building a little reputation for herself as a psychic or clairvoyant. And of course, this was not taken kindly by the nuns, and she would be punished over and over in various ways for her premonitions and for talking about them. But she was, the ultimate rebel and just continued doing it regardless. And then when she was about 14, her stepmother couldn't afford to pay for her convent education anymore. So she was kind of sent out into the world to support herself. The convent was in the countryside. She went to Paris all on her own, and she is said to have been given a tarot deck by Romani travelers, which
Hmm.
sparked her interest in reading cards. So she kind of dove into teaching herself how to read the cards and sort of like tucked that knowledge into her back pocket for later. And then went on to get a job as a sales clerk and started to work with numbers, working a cashier for a shop. And it was here that she started to kind of explore numerology and
Mm.
then kind of like tucked that into her back pocket. So she was sort of picking up different divination methods wherever she went, starting with the clairvoyance, then the cards, then numerology. And she was very intelligent, kind of knew that all of these skills and experiences would come in handy at some point.
Hmm.
She eventually went on to open her own shop on a very wealthy street in Paris where she offered fortune telling, card reading, psychic readings. And it was kind of a running joke that she would always get reported to the police,
Hmm.
arrested, spend the
Hmm.
night in jail, and then released again the next morning. Like they just had to sell for her. It was just expected and she rolled with it. And
Cost of doing business.
the cost of doing business as a woman of the time. And she kind of experienced this like strange mix of acceptance by the wealthy people who would hire her for her services, but also this criticism from society at large that didn't accept her enough because she was constantly getting the cops called on her. So she was kind of in this weird middle ground. And then the French Revolution really ramped up, as we were talking about. Violence is spreading throughout the country. There's all this instability. There's these public executions and poverty and everything else that came along with the political unrest. And that's when her business started to boom. People were
Hmm.
scared and they came to her for guidance. Is my family going to be safe? I'm a politician. Are they going to come for me next? Am I going to the guillotine? You know, the kind of questions that maybe a priest couldn't answer for you.
Yep.
And she would use, you know, a mix of numerology, card reading, astrology, palmistry, clairvoyance, all of these things, a little bit of everything to make predictions for people, mostly for the noble class. And she ended up like foretelling the beheading of King Louis the 16th.
Mm.
And that's when the public really started to respect her.
Mm-hmm.
And she began to really make a name for herself. She was loyal to the monarchy. So I don't know if she were around now, we might not jive with her
Like her.
politically. She tried to save Marie Antoinette from prison. She like snuck in and pretended to be like a servant girl and then had like a whole plan to release her. And Marie Antoinette was actually too afraid. She kind of froze. So it was a failed attempt.
Wow. Wait. So she's trying to do a prison break, basically?
She was trying to do a prison break, and it
Wow.
might have been successful had Marie cooperated, but she was too kind of fear-stricken.
And am I remembering she was also Josephine Bonaparte's card reader?
Exactly. So she went on to become the personal tarot reader for Napoleon I's wife, Josephine Bonaparte. She made several accurate predictions for her, and she went on to write lots of books that kind of popularized divination for the masses. And she lived to be a ripe old age, and we essentially can credit her for kind of paving the way for female fortune tellers,
Mm.
you know, to make a living at a time when it wasn't so easy for women to do their own thing without being supported by a husband.
Yes. And there's a deck that's named after her.
Yeah.
And it's available now. And I've seen different versions of it. I know Rachel Pollack and Robert M. Place did their own version of a Lenormand deck. But the folks who originally did it, that wasn't her. It's not like she designed a deck, correct? It's just that an oracle deck was named after her. Am I right about that?
Yeah, it was kind of produced in her honor. It was inspired by the decks that she would use, which were kind of mixes of different influences throughout history up until that point. They look different than a tarot deck that we would recognize. Yeah, you can still get them. I have the Bluebird Lenormand deck, which is kind of the classic one based on what she practiced. And it's a little bit more similar to playing cards with like hearts and clubs and things like that. And there are little passages on the cards about envy or wealth, more of like a fortune kind of situation than a piece of artwork that can be interpreted in a number of ways.
Fabulous. On that note, we're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back.
This episode of The Witch Wave is brought to you by Maud's Paper Wing Gallery. The queer witches of Maud's Paper Wing Gallery would like to say Happy Pride Month to all the queer folks tuning in. Maud's queer witches are building a community of witchy and queer nerds where folks can be silly and soft together, step into their authentic selves, play with gender, heal from trauma, and be vulnerable with one another. They would love for you to join them. So if you're near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, stop in for Queer Coven or their monthly full moon parties at their haunted They Bar, Harold's Haunt. Or you can join their virtual community on Discord or Facebook. Need to stock up on Pride merch from a small queer-owned business as we head into June? Shop with Maud's Queer Witches at queerwitches.com. And you can get 13% off your first order with offer code WITCHWAVE. That's one word, WITCHWAVE, for 13% off your first order at queerwitches.com. They hope your summer is full of silly fun, rainbows, glitter, love, and support.
You've heard me wax ecstatic about Snowy Owl Tea before, and so you will understand why I am so excited to announce that I have teamed up with them to create an exclusive Witch Wave herbal tea blend just for you. Witch Wave tea combines some of my favorite botanicals, including nettles, rosehip, lavender, elderflower, and vanilla. And there's also some butterfly pea flower in there, which means that if you squeeze some lemon into your tea after it's brewed, the color will change, just like magic. And of course, it comes in Snowy Owl's signature shiny holographic packaging with a brand new black cat and purple moon label, all of which makes me swoon. This Witch Wave tea blend from me and Snowy Owl is now available in the Witch Wave shop while supplies last. So head on over to witchwavepodcast.com/shop to order yours now. It's currently the only place where you can buy this tea blend. But don't forget to also check out Snowy Owl Tea's other delicious tea blends over on their website, snowyowltea.com, and you'll see why I fell in love with their handcrafted, scrumptious, full-leaf tea and blossom blends in the first place. Some of my favorites of theirs include Second Breakfast, which is a blend of lemon, poppy seed, and oat, and 11th Hour Black Tea, which has vanilla and cardamom. And best of all, Snowy Owl is offering 10% off any teas ordered from their site using code POTION. So head over to snowyowltea.com and use code POTION for 10% off their house blends. And if you want our new, exclusive, delicious, color-changing Witch Wave herbal tea blend, you can order that now over at witchwavepodcast.com/shop.
Welcome back to the Witch Wave. Today I'm speaking with Kat Willett. So Kat, the other name that we invoked earlier is the name Lady Frieda Harris. Now, I think of her relationship with Aleister Crowley as almost like the inverse of Pamela Colman Smith's relationship with A.E. Waite, because Lady Frieda Harris, even though she and Crowley kind of had some contention around, well, I mean, it's Crowley, right? Of course there's going to be contention. But, they worked on a deck together. She was the illustrator for it. But she was wealthy and she was credited, and Crowley seemed to give her the respect, and she seemed to have some financial backing, or maybe it was her own financial backing. Anyhow, I'm jumping ahead and I'm saying too much, but I'd love for you to talk about Lady Frieda Harris and how she and Crowley worked together.
Yeah, great question. So she was a noblewoman, as her name would imply. She was married to a politician. She created the artwork for the Thoth deck, which is the second most popular tarot deck in the world, second to the Rider-Waite-Smith. And she did have a bit of a higher social status than, say, someone like Pamela. What's interesting about her is that she married, she raised her children, and then she started to pursue her art in her 40s.
Yes, love a middle-aged moment. Yes.
Love it. Because she had money, it was sort of accepted for her to pursue art because she didn't rely on it to make a living. So right there, you have this huge contrast to Pamela, as you mentioned. She met Aleister Crowley when she was 60, and she kind of urged him to create a tarot deck.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and he was kind of unstable, controversial, problematic, all the things.
Wickedest man in the world, blah, blah, blah.
Totally sucks. But she sort of backed him, both financially and emotionally to create this deck. So he wrote the Book of Thoth, which attempted to link tarot to Egypt, and then her artwork brought it to life. She studied projected geometry and kind of had the time to really pour into making this artwork super unique. She wasn't in a rush to make it, unlike Pamela, who was sort of working for pay and needed to finish her job quickly so she'd, get her paycheck. She actually took 5 years to make all of the paintings for the cards.
Let's just pause there. So Pixie had 6 months. Lady Frieda Harris had 5 years.
5 years.
And they're both stunning decks, let's be clear. But Lady Frieda Harris's work, it's very crystalline and prismatic.
Mm-hmm.
How do you describe the images?
Yeah, I think it's very much taking this sacred geometry education that she had into play. She kind of had the time to integrate all these studies into her work to envision this whole new deck. And it is kind of kaleidoscopic. I would say it's much more shrouded in symbolism than the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Pamela's drawings were very much okay, this is the fool walking, about to step off the cliff. You can tell exactly what's going on. You see the little dog. And Frieda's drawings, paintings were much more symbolic And I think they wanted to create something that was a bit more
Esoteric.
coded,
Mm-hmm.
esoteric, like you needed to read the Book of Thoth to understand them, which was Aleister Crowley's contribution. But she also incorporated some of this kind of Art Deco inspiration, which was a sign of
Yes.
the times because it was like the 1930s when she was creating, and, you know, mathematical elements, which all combined makes the artwork really stunning and unique. And I really like looking at the deck, but I don't find myself using it as often because it requires a bit more work
Mm-hmm.
to understand. But that said, I think it's a really incredible feat. But, you know, similarly to Pamela, Lady Frieda Harris did not experience the success or the direct impact from that deck during her lifetime because it was published after both she and Aleister Crowley had passed away.
I
It
see.
was not published until 1969. So she made these really big paintings that were exhibited during her life, but the cards were reproduced from the paintings much later.
Yes, yes. So, something you brought up is that Crowley is trying to connect tarot to ancient Egypt, and he's not the first one. I feel like there are a lot of tarot writers and occultists and scholars who say, oh, these tarot cards, they come from ancient Egypt.
Hmm.
Now, in fact, I think it's been proven, insofar as these things can be, that tarot has a different origin story. And you write about that in, I think, both your books, certainly in the Women in Tarot book. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically, tarot stems from ancient Middle Eastern playing cards that go back as early as the 1200s. And they would be from what is modern day like Turkey or Iran, not
Mm-hmm.
Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert M. Place, who is a great tarot scholar, you mentioned that he worked on a deck with Rachel Pollack. He has made the claim that they couldn't have been Egyptian because ancient Egyptians used papyrus, which would fray at that
Mm-hmm.
size. Like you can't really make cards out of papyrus. That's why there were these long scrolls.
Right.
So there's actually a lot of reasons why, you know, it wouldn't really be tied back to ancient Egypt. But I think that, like Aleister Crowley and other philosophers, they wanted to believe that they had inherited some kind of divine wisdom
Mm-hmm.
that was only meant for them. And
Mm-hmm.
they kind of used that as a means of keeping other people out of the narrative. The Order of the Golden Dawn had almost like a caste system, a hierarchy that women, for example, could not travel through, and people at the top were given access to books that spelled out the origins of tarot and the connection to ancient Egypt. And that was kind of their secret right.
Mm-hmm.
But we know today that it was all kind of made up,
Not to mention culturally appropriative and
culturally
right, right.
appropriative. And that's not to say that they didn't actually believe it. But yeah, you know, today, looking back from an archaeological perspective, it just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And also the Mamluk cards, which were these ancient Middle Eastern playing cards that modern day tarot stems from, they actually did not have a divination purpose. They were playing cards. They had games, you know, similar to something like dominoes or Mancala. You know, it was a game that people played to pass the time. And those cards were absolutely beautiful. They were hand painted. They were these stunning works of art. And they were eventually, you know, passed on to Europeans via trade, first to Italy and then to France. And then in the Renaissance, painters started to create their own versions of them. And then over time, different people applied different meanings and different hypotheses on where they came from. And all the layers started to build. And it eventually morphed into what tarot is today
Mm-hmm.
over hundreds of years.
When did they become used for divination? I know you cover this in
Mm.
your writing, but I'm forgetting. Was it in the 15th century when it reaches Italy, or was it after that?
It was a little bit after. So in the 1500s, the cards morphed into kind of like a poetry game, which is, I think, is very, very cool. People
Ah,
would come together and pull a card and then kind of like write down a poem inspired by the art.
literally an exercise that Jonica and I do in our
Ah,
occult writing workshop, and an exercise I'm writing about in my new book. So I love hearing that.
yeah, I mean, it's really cool. And even though that wasn't necessarily a spiritual practice, it kind of integrated chance, you know, this
Mm-hmm.
idea that you would pull a card and see what it brought up for you. But it was still reserved just for like wealthy people at the time. And then, yeah, into the 1700s, people started to become more interested in the origin of tarot cards. philosophers and writers began to write about them and hypothesize on where they came from. And then I think by the French Revolution with Marie-Anne Lenormand, that's when cards started to fall into more of an occult realm. And in the 1800s, we get the Order of the Golden Dawn, and they kind of appropriated tarot as part of their teachings.
And here we are today.
Here we are today. And not too
Yes.
much later, the Grandatelia deck comes out, which was the first deck that was designed specifically for mystical use. So to answer your question, that was the late 1800s.
Wonderful.
So pretty recent, you
Yeah,
know, when you think
yeah.
of these ancient card origins, the actual use of tarot, the way that we use it today is pretty recent.
I love that. That's so fascinating to me. Kat, we only have a few minutes left, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that in addition to your amazing illustrations, you've also been doing stained glass. You have some stained glass tarot cards that you've created. And I just wanted to touch on that very briefly, just because I personally find it fascinating. And I love when you post your stained glass in addition to all your beautiful illustrations and comics.
Oh, thank you so much. It's funny because I see that as like such a hobby. I didn't expect you to bring it up.
Yeah, but it just gives me joy. And I don't know, I just love how eclectic and open you are to just letting your own magic and beauty express itself through all different kinds of mediums.
Thank you. It's funny because my work is so creative, but I felt like I still needed an additional creative outlet because I spend a lot of time on screens, you know, writing and
Sure.
researching. And also my illustration work is usually digital. And I really wanted to do something that was like purely tactile. It was a bit serendipitous. I went on a trip to France a couple of years ago and I kind of stumbled into this stained glass studio. And I was just like so taken by it. And it's funny, I'm looking at it right now. You guys can't see it, but I have a stained glass piece hanging in my window that my dad made when he was in high school.
Oh, I love that.
It's just been a piece that's been in my house since I was a little kid, and I kind of stole it and brought it to Brooklyn. And it just kind of dawned on me like, oh, that's a thing you can do. Like, you can learn how to make stained glass, and how special would that be? So, yeah, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and I decided to reinterpret some of the tarot cards through glass, which has been interesting because I feel like light kind of encapsulates like spirits in a way. Like,
Oh,
it's
yes.
so magical. And
Yeah. I may have talked about this on the show before, but my husband and I have been renting the same apartment for 1,000 years in Brooklyn. We're like locked in. We just can't ever leave, basically, because, it's a rent stabilized place. And unfortunately, they built a building next to our main window. And so we're just getting like a lot less light. And we used to see the tops of trees, and now we just see a gray building, and it's so depressing. We still get beautiful light in the bedrooms, thank goodness. But the first thing I did, I was like, we have to make this window a beautiful portal. Otherwise, I'll just be so sad and depressed every time I look at it. And so we ended up ordering this gorgeous stained glass piece. And I'm such a sucker too for when stained glass makes rainbows. And this piece happens to have that refraction to it. And it has like transformed something that was like so negative and dismal and dreary into like this magical little art portal. I just love stained glass so much. I really hope to get to see some of yours in person sometime. It's really beautiful what you're making.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm also such a sucker for prisms and rainbows. And I have a
Yes.
toddler now, and we like to look at them together. And I feel like it brings you back to childhood, like looking at how light can glow through glass. And the best thing about it is it's ethereal, it's always moving. And yeah.
How wonderful. Kat, I'm going to ask you a question I bet you get asked a lot, which is I know you've illustrated several oracle decks. Do you think you're ever going to illustrate your own full tarot deck?
I am working on one.
Get out of here.
I'm currently working on one. We haven't really announced it yet, so I'm not going to mention my collaborator until it's official, but she's amazing. She's someone I have included in my new book. And yeah, we're working on it. We're basically just taking our time because we want it to feel right. And I feel like I am still very much a student of tarot. I approached my first book from an art historical perspective and then, began to learn about tarot on the way. And so I still feel like I'm very much a novice, but this has been a really great way to kind of learn about each card as I create it.
I can only imagine the new levels you're going to unlock in your own tarot reading and your own spiritual path as you're diving so deeply into your own cards. How magnificent. Well, that's exciting. Hopefully, you will not have to do it in only 6 months, and hopefully, you'll be compensated and credited much better than Pixie Smith was.
It's already been longer than that, so I think I'm good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, listen, Kat, unfortunately, we're out of time. I could just talk to you forever, but let's just give a few shout outs. When is Women of Tarot officially released, and what celebrations are going on for it? And finally, where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about your illustration or even hire you to collaborate on something with them?
Yeah, so Women of Tarot is coming out on June 18th. We are having a big launch party at Dear Friend Books in Bed-Stuy from 6 to 9, and it's going to be great. We have a stick and poke tattoo artist who's going to be doing little mini tarot-related tattoos.
Whoa!
We will have Nansei Kawashima doing tarot readings. I'm actually partnering with my amazing, talented friend, Eva Radamonte, who has just illustrated her own tarot deck, and she will be releasing it there. So we're both going to do a little talk and presentation about our works, and then we'll be doing some signings. And then what else? We have a Tarot Tuesday event at Astoria Bookshop in Queens on June 25th. And if you're in the upstate area, June 23rd is going to be a launch party at Ritualist Shop, which
wonderful.
is a gorgeous little witch shop in New Paltz. So yeah, I hope that all your listeners can join at one of those. And there will be some virtual events as well.
Fabulous. And if people want to connect with you, follow you, etc.
I'm on Instagram at catxwillett, 2 L's, 2 T's in my last name.
Perfect. And you have a very wonderful website as well where people can check out your work and contact you for other commissions and projects too. Kat, what a pleasure it's been to speak with you. I just adore your art. You're a delight. Congratulations on all your beautiful magical work. And thank you so much for being on the Witch Wave.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for the show. Thank you again to Kat Willett for sharing her divinely divinatory work with me. Do you have questions, feedback, need some witchly advice, or just want to share something magical that happened to you recently? Please do drop us an email or a voice memo at witchwavepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and you just might make it on the Witchwire. The Witch Wave is a Phantasmophile production written and produced by me, Pam Grossman. This episode was recorded and edited by Josh Wilcox and or Walter Nordquist and myself. Our theme music is the song Hand and I by Lycanthia. Our new Witch Wave logo was designed by Thunderwing. And special thanks, as always, go to Matt Freeman, Laura Antal, and Cece Pascal. You can check out information about this and other episodes on our website and now buy Witch Wave merch over at witchwavepodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and do consider giving us lots and lots of sparkly stars and glowing reviews. It really, truly does make a difference and helps other people find the show. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at WitchWavePod, and you can check out my witch emoji for iPhone by going to witchemoji.com or downloading it in the App Store. My book, Waking the Witch, is available everywhere now, and the Witchcraft book I edited and co-authored for Taschen is as well, so thank you for checking those out too. And if you want more Witch Wave, or you would just like to support the show, please do join us over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/witchwave. Thank you so much for listening. Witches are the future. I'll catch you next time on the Witch Wave.